What's up, everybody? This is Ben, and we are back with the MC-101 lesson number 4, which is effects. Once again, this is the series where we go from knowing nothing about anything about music or electronic music or anything to full proficient MC-101 user. Thanks so much, everybody, for checking it out. I'm up to 555 subscribers now, which is crazy because it's a huge number, which, thank you. It's also pretty neat because a 555 chip is an integrated circuit that's often used in timing for synthesis, which doesn't matter to anybody watching this. Doesn't even really matter to me. I just thought it was kind of neat. It's a cool number, but thanks so much for checking it out. I hope this stuff's been useful to you, so I don't want to waste any more time, so I'm gonna go right into effects. So the MC-101 has 3 different types of effects, and they are track effects, send effects, and master effects. So we're gonna talk about all 3 of them in this lesson, and how I use them and how they're often used. The different types of effects are used in music production. Which isn't to say that's how you have to use them. It's just how I use them and how a lot of people use them, and give you some ideas and places to start. So the first type of effect is a track effect. And they can be from subtle effects to very extreme effects, but the point is they change the sound of one track. So if we go back to thinking about our 4 different musicians, like drums, bass, rhythm, lead type of things, if you want to change the way the drummer sounds or you want to change the way the bassist sounds, you're going to use a track effect. A master effect is going to affect everything in the track. It's going to affect everybody equally, and that is sort of, you're going to affect how your band sounds, how everything sounds together, and that's the sort of thing you're going to do if you want to make everything sound real cohesive and, put it on a CD or something. And the third type is a little bit more subtle, and they're send effects. So they are effects that you set once, kind of like master effects. You set them for everything, and then you can change how much each sound goes to each track, each musician goes to that effect. And on this, and in most cases, they're reverb and delay. And they help put everything in one space. They make it sound like all of your musicians are playing together in one room. And that can be really, really powerful for holding everything together, putting it all in a space somewhere that, makes it sound real professional sounding. So those are the 3 things we're going to cover. Hopefully they're along the bottom somewhere. I got a real professional green screen behind me. Hopefully I'm going to figure out how to tag the things right before helpful people on YouTube remind me in the comments that I should tag stuff. So let's start with our track effects. So to demonstrate track effects, in fact, before we get into anything like that, I am going to explain one thing that I should have probably explained in a previous video, and that is sound source per track. In our previous videos, up until this point, we have only one sound on a track, but you can change the sound so that each clip has a different sound in it. So if you remember, I had the mild saw lead on track 4 in our previous video. So if I make a new clip, it will have the mild saw lead sound. But if I want at a different part of my song to have a different sound on track 4, all I have to do is go to Shift 4, and here it says sound source track, and change that to clip. That means each clip can have a different sound source. So the whole track still has to be a tone track, but it can have a different tone. So now we have the initial tone on clip 2. Now, I have to tell you, when you do that on an existing project, it gets rid of the tone that you had set on that project. So on the first clip, clip 1, we had mild saw lead, so I can just go pull that up, I think, pretty quick. And set that there so I don't lose anything. But I'm going to use clip 2 right now, which has the initial tone, because that's a little bit better for explaining the stuff that I want to explain. So the first thing I should explain, again, before we get into anything too intense, is this animation display that's hopefully right here. All that's an FL Studio plugin where I'm recording this. It's called Wave Candy, which you don't have to worry about. But it gives us a nice picture of the frequencies that we're dealing with here. So the low frequencies are the bottom, high frequencies are at the top. You can see when I play it, sort of what's going on there. So that's a useful tool that we're going to use as we go through this. So now we can talk about track effects. So what track effects do we have to mess with? We have two. They are the Equalizer and the MFX multi-effects. So we're going to start simple with the Equalizer. So to access the Equalizer, we're going to hit Shift and the track number. And we're going to scroll our way over to EQ switch, Equalizer switch. We're going to turn it on. Now, we have a whole bunch of different parameters that are the Equalizer settings. And you can see what parameters are the EQ settings because up here in parentheses it says EQ. When you're over here, these are the generator settings, EQ settings, then there's the MIDI settings for the track. So we're going to stay in the EQ section for now. And we have a few different things. We have input gain, we have settings for the low, for the mid, and for the high. The high and the low have one less setting than the mid, and we're going to talk about that right now. Now's the time to talk about it. So, what's an EQ? An EQ changes the frequencies of the sound that you're hearing. This can be really useful especially for mixing. If you want to mix all four of your tracks together, get them sounding nice and professional, but you don't want to go into a DAW to do it, this is super, super valuable. A DAW being a computer digital audio workstation. Here, you can do all of it right on the MC-101, which is really useful. So, I'm just going to explain what an EQ is, how it can work, and show a little bit of an example of that. So we have our raw sound here, and just to demonstrate some stuff, I'm going to... You can use the input gain just to turn this down or up. If you turn it way up, you can make tracks a lot louder. If you're worried about the output volume of this, if you find that it's a little bit too low, you can turn each input gain up like 10 dB, and it's a lot louder without getting too many artifacts. You can crank this all the way up. I'm not going to hit the button because it'll blow out my headphones and probably your speakers. But you can make this very loud if you want to. You'll get some clipping, which can be a good thing. But you know, that's a nice option that you just have like a strong gain control right there. Now into the actual EQing. So you have, I'm going to use the mid band. So the low pass and the high, sorry, they're not low passes. The low EQ is a shelf, which will just lower everything below that, and the high is a high that will lower or raise everything below that. The mid is a movable band, though. So in the low, well, I'm going to explain the mid, and then I'm going to explain how that sort of relates to the high and the low. So you have gain, which you can turn up. You can hear those mids coming up, and you can see that hopefully in this picture here. You can sort of get rid of them. And you'll notice over here, hopefully you can see it, says 1 kilohertz. If you can't, though, you can sort of see where that is. And that's the frequency that we're set to. So we can move this all around if we want to. And just to demonstrate what's going on here, I'm going to go to the low gain, and I'm going to turn it very low. And I'm going to go to the high gain, and I'm going to turn that very low. And I'm just going to move this up a little bit. Great. So now all we're seeing is sort of the mid stuff. So I'm going to turn the mid gain up so you can sort of see what it's doing. So you see it sort of light up there, which is good. And then, so all this is changing the frequency information. So if I change the frequency here, you can see on this visualization that we're changing what frequency we're dealing with. So this I talked about in my advanced sound design video, but the initial patch here is very close to a sawtooth wave, which has relatively even spectrum from low to high, which is why it's a useful thing to show this with. So your gain, plus or minus, is how loud it is. Your frequency is what frequency it's centered on. And then the Q is unique to the mid band, because this is really a band pass filter, kind of, that you're adding with the low and the high. So you can, if you change this up, if you go down, you get a wider spread of frequencies that the mid band is affecting. And if you go up with the Q, you get a narrower band that you're impacting. So if I bring this all the way up to 16 and now scan the frequencies, you can see a pretty sharp line that goes through there. You see that? It's pretty neat. You can use that for weird effects if you want to, but this is just sort of a demonstration. Normally, if you want like sort of a more subtle EQ effect, you can make this bigger, so you have a broader range of frequencies that you're impacting. So yeah, I mean that's what the EQ is. It's super useful to change stuff so it doesn't interfere with other stuff. You might want to lower the high frequencies of the bass, for example, and then lower the low frequencies of the guitar so that they sit next to each other. So you can change all of that stuff. Now, the low and the high are shelves. So they don't have a Q parameter, but if I come back to the mid and I put the mid back to 0, or actually let's lower the mid, make the Q a bit wider, so we lower most of that, and now we're mostly just seeing the lows, especially if I turn the lows on. So now we can see the lows there. And then if I raise the frequency here, so I have to get the mid out of the way. I can turn this up now, and you hear that's real low. And then you're changing the height, you're changing the frequency with the frequency parameter on the low. You're affecting all the frequencies below this point. And in the same way, on the high, you're changing all the frequencies above this frequency. So that is how the EQ works. Play around with it, have some fun, same with everything. For now, I'm just going to turn it off so we're not distracted when we talk about the other stuff. But yeah, that's EQ. The next track effect is a multi-effect. Now, Roland ecosystem has this thing called multi-effects, or MFX. And it can be easy to get that confused with master effects, but it's not. Multi-effect is just their engine of effects, and it can be a master effect or a track effect. So right now we're talking about it in the context of a track effect. And so to change the MFX, the multi-effects on track 4, you go to track 4, you hit Shift, Sound, and you bring up Setting. Oh, no, sorry. You hit Shift Sound and you scroll over to multi-effect, and you hit OK. And we find that by default, the multi-effect is through. It depends on what patch you have loaded, but this is the init patch, so by default, the effect is through. But you can hit OK, you can hit Enter, and there's, I think, 90 of these. There's a lot of them. And they're all sorts of different types. There's other equalizers. These are all different types of equalizers. Filters. Humanizer's a fun one. If you check out my advanced sound design video, which hopefully I'll link above or in the description, or in the playlist that I have for the MC-101, I talk about some of these crazier effects because they're really cool, but they can really radically change the nature of the sound that you're dealing with. I mean, you can see all the crazy stuff that's going on just from these things. Have some fun exploring these. Particularly fun, or near the end, there's these. This is like overdrive into chorus. They're like chains of effects. which can take even this init patch to like pretty crazy places, I think. So there's choruses, overdrives, amp simulations, delays, all sorts of crazy stuff. And this is where you can really do a lot of like shaping and you know, manipulating of your sound, is in the track multi-effects. So I'm not going to go too in-depth on those. Again, check out my advanced sound design video where I really I dig into a lot of these different effects. Yeah, so those are track effects. You have an EQ and a multi-effect on each track. And they're very useful for a lot of different things, so make sure that they stay on your mind. But now we're going to go into master effects. And so the master effect, there are 3 different master effects, and 2 of them are the same as the track effect. So you can have a multi-effect on a track, but you can also have a multi-effect on the master. So the master, all of your master effects you get to by hitting Shift, Edit. This is the edit for the multi-effect button. And then you have multi-effects. We're not going to talk about reverb and delay yet. Those are your sound effects. But you have compressor, EQ, and multi-effects. So again, EQ is the same. The only difference between the master EQ and the track EQ, one is obviously the master is on across all 4 tracks. The track EQ is only on your 1 track. The other difference is that it has 5 bands, which means there's a low with gain and frequency. There's a mid 1 with gain, frequency, and Q. Works the same way. Mid 2, gain, frequency, Q. Mid 3, gain, frequency, 2. And then high, gain, and frequency. This gives you a lot on the mastering step when you're finished with your song. This is when you're finished with your song and you like it and you want to put it out on YouTube or Spotify or SoundCloud or a CD or whatever. If you want it to sound a very particular way, you might want to listen to it next to a reference track that you want it to sound like. You can use this to really dial in and sculpt the end game of your sound. So if you have something you really like, honestly, throw on a track that you want it to sound like, and then listen to yours and see maybe if yours sounds a little bit too muddy and bassy, maybe turn up the highs, or like maybe mid 3, like raise that up somewhere and try to make it spark a little bit more. You'll find with a little work on the EQ, the master EQ, you can really make something sound nice and professional. So give that a shot. It's in here. It's a great tool. Next, multi-effects. Same deal with the multi-effects on the master as it is on the track. There's some, you can change the type. There's some 90 or something of them. Cool thing, I think firmware 1.3, they made it so these knobs are for the multi-effect. So real quick, by default, it is the multi-mode filter. So if you have your song playing, you can turn this on and off with this button. It lights up red when the multi-effect is on. And then these knobs will affect stuff. So for the multi-mode filter, it's really useful as a performance effect. And a lot of these, in fact, are useful as performance effects. And you have a couple of knobs here to change the vibe of it. As of the newest firmwares, I think after 1.3, these, when you change the multi-effect, these knobs will automatically map to something useful. Like if I change my multi-effect to, say, a phaser, like a step phaser maybe, and we hit play, these automatically, you can do a lot of fun stuff with these sorts of effects. And then the cool thing about this, the master multi-effect, is if you use it as a performance thing, you can turn it on, off and on real quick with this button, and then you just have these knobs ready to go. If you have the older firmware, you can either update the firmware, or you can hold this button down, and then it says knob assign, and change this knob, which you can pick which you want, which parameters of the multi-effect that you want the knobs to affect. The new firmware, it will automatically pick 2 parameters for you. You can still change them if you want, but this You can still change them just by holding this button. But depending on the effect, it automatically will set it to something that's pretty useful. Personally, for me, I like to set up the master effect. I use this enhancer pretty often. I also use the saturator on the master multi-effect. And it just makes stuff sound better. There's some compression, some EQ, maybe a little saturation going on with the enhancer, but I think that it sounds really good. So if I turn it on and turn the mix and the sensitivity down, to set it up, I like to turn the mix all the way up and adjust the sensitivity till I think it sounds good. That's like a lot, but if I turn it somewhere in here and then dial the mix down so it's not like overwhelming that. If you have it up too high, you lose some of the bass, but I just think that sounds really good. Turning it helps everything sound a little bit crispier and lighter. So I really like that as a mastering effect. But you know, play around. Same deal with the saturator. I like to use the saturator. So if again, there's a wet dry knob here by default and a drive knob over here. So I'll turn it all the way to wet, put the drive to 0, and it won't change anything. Turning it off and on doesn't change anything. Then you turn this on, you start to get real crunchy. So I like to give it where it has that, like right around here, it has that like oomph with the kick and stuff and the bass. And then I dial the wet knob, the dry wet, which is the dry is the unaffected signal, the wet is the affected signal. And you can mix between those with this knob. I like to turn it on so you can just hear a little bit of that crunch. And that can be a real nice master effect as well. Again, on, off. Whenever you're doing this, the EQ or the master effect or the compressor on the master track, I like to turn things off and on and see if I actually helped it. If I like it better without it off, we skip it. We try something else. So that's a useful thing to try. So that is multi-effects on the master track. Again, you know, try stuff. A lot of these are really good as like performance things. If you don't need it for the mastering, you can use it as a performance effect, and then you can just have fun twiddling the knobs. It's real great. So we're gonna go now to the final master effect, which is the compressor. Now, if you're familiar with how compressors work, this is gonna be probably boring for you. If you're not familiar, you want a refresher on how compressors work, stay tuned for the next few minutes. Otherwise, you can probably skip to the next thing down here. But a compressor, at its core, makes loud noises. It makes the loud parts of your songs quieter. And then usually has a gain control that will make up for that. So it makes the loud parts, so if you have a track, you know, like this, the waveform goes up and down a lot. It takes the loud parts, makes them quieter, and then makes everything louder. And the point of this is everything sounds more consistent. You can still have sort of the vibe that stuff got quieter, but it doesn't really get quieter, which is super, super useful if you want your songs to sound consistent through, or you want your album to sound consistent, or you want every song that's on the radio to sound exactly the same in the background while you're driving in the car. If you listen to pop music, you've heard a lot of compression. So it's great. It's great for making things sound professional, sound crisp, sound consistent, and you can use it as like an effect to mess with stuff, but really, especially on the master, it helps everything just sound put together and professional. So we're going to talk quick about how it works and how to set it up. So again, Shift, Edit, scroll over to Compressor. It has an on. We're going to turn it on because we're going to be using it. And then it has a whole bunch of things that might not make sense at first, but that's okay. We're going to talk about them. So, excuse me. Once again, it has a split high and a split low all the way to the right. So there's 3 bands, low, medium, and high. And the split parameter just changes The split low changes where the low compressor kicks on and the mid compressor kicks on. Split high is between the mid compressor and the high compressor. So you can adjust those frequencies as you see fit. For now, I'm going to leave them where they are by default. And I'm only going to talk about the mid compressor because will be the easiest for you to hear, depending on what speakers you're listening to. And they're all exactly the same for the low, mid, and high, just where which frequencies we're affecting. So every compressor, I think just about every compressor, has two very important parameters, and they are the ratio and the threshold. So I'm going to talk about them together. The threshold, if 0 dB is your full volume, the threshold is going from 0 dB all the way down to minus 60 dB on this particular compressor, which is very far. Normal settings somewhere, well, it depends a lot on what you're doing, and you can look up all sorts of how to compress videos on YouTube. I'm just trying to give some sort of overview. Basically, the threshold lowers it, so once your music comes above the threshold, the compressor starts compressing. That's all that it is. So to really hear it, I'm going to set this to like minus 30 dB. So anytime our mid frequency range goes above minus 30 dB, which is medium volume, it's going to start pushing stuff down. It's going to start making things quieter. Now the ratio, you'll notice I lowered it, but it doesn't sound different yet because the ratio is the other important parameter. And the ratio is if it goes so far above the threshold, how hard is it pushing it back down? So a ratio of 1:1 means if it goes 1 dB above the threshold, it's pushing it down to 1 dB above the threshold, or it's not doing anything at all. It's going to let everything go through. If we move it up to, say, 8 dB, if anything that goes 8 dB above the threshold is going to get pushed back down to 1 dB above the threshold. Basically, like that. So now, if I play it, you're going to hear some difference. And this goes all the way up to 32 above the threshold, all the way down to 1, which is pretty heavy. And then there's an infinite setting, which means if it goes to the threshold, it's staying at the threshold no matter how high the original signal tries to go. So if we set it to... So the other thing, I mentioned this briefly in my version 1.6 video. This little meter here shows you how much compression is happening. So if I turn the threshold all the way back up, you don't hear any compression happening, and the meter's not going because nothing's really going up to 0 dB. So if I turn this down, you could really hear that get quieter, right? So yeah, the ratio is set quite high. The threshold is set quite low. You're going to hear quite a bit of compression. Now, the other most important parameter on a compressor is the makeup gain. The gain will help you bring it back to where you're just making everything louder again. So you can hear everything. I am going to talk about the knee. The knee is how hard it pushes stuff down if it's between... If I say, does it go 32 dB above? When it goes 32 dB above, it pushes it back down to 1. But what does it do at 6 dB above? That's the knee's problem to sort out. So a really high knee is going to be sharp, and it's going to really push stuff down. It's going to start really pushing stuff down at just a little bit above the threshold. Whereas a soft knee, 1 to 5 or 10 dB is going to be a little bit more lenient on stuff that's only a little bit above the threshold. That's sort of how it works. Again, there's plenty of better videos on YouTube on how compressors work, but a higher knee is going to be a little bit harsher, basically. So then the makeup gain is going to be like this. And then an important part of compressing is that you have to know that everything sounds better when it's louder. That's just a fact. It's why so many musicians have hearing loss. The stuff sounds good loud. So don't be careful with the gain. Don't just crank it all the way up because it'll sound better, but it won't really be a better mix. It's just a louder mix. And And louder mixes don't necessarily translate well when you go to different speakers or you put it on something else. A well-compressed mix will sound better, but a louder mix won't sound better. It'll just sound louder, but there's a volume knob on everything. So people change the volume that you want. But don't trick yourself into thinking that it's better just because it's louder. So the way that we do that is we scroll all the way back to the on-off switch, and we just turn it off and on. And it sounds quite a bit louder. We want it to sound more full with the compressor on, but we don't want it to sound louder with the compressor on. So when I switched between off and on, to me it sounded a little bit louder. So I'm going to turn the makeup gain down just to like maybe a little bit, 7. And now, hopefully, you hear that? It sounds a lot more full, but it doesn't sound louder. So that's good. We don't want it to be louder. We want it to sound more full. So I like that as a setting. Good. So that's compression. You can do that for the low and the high bands as well as the mid band. And the only other settings are attack and release. So attack is how long does it take for the compressor to start compressing. And release is how long does it take for it to stop compressing after the sound goes away. Because these are always, anything in audio processing, there's always you need something on the bottom or at the beginning and the end. Otherwise you get like clicks and stuff. So for attack, by default, it's very, very short, 0.1 milliseconds. And that can, especially in the mids and the highs, if you have aggressive compressor settings, that can make your transients, the beginning oomph of everything, sound a little bit softer because the compressor's kicking in so quickly. So that can make like your drums, like your snares and your hi-hats not sound as snappy if the attack is very low. So if you listen carefully to the drums, you'll probably hear it. They'll be a little less snappy when the compressor's on versus when it's off. So when it's on and then off, oops, off. Maybe a little bit. It's hard for me to hear. I don't think it's so bad here, but in any case, if you have a hard compressor in the mids and the highs on the master, sometimes it can affect your drums. Just turn the attack up to 5 or 6 milliseconds and that snap will come back. So that's, useful thing. Release is kind of a tricky parameter. If you set the release just right, it can help the song sort of breathe as the compressor comes in and out in time with the music. Now, you used to have to do that by ear. On the MC-101, as of the newest firmware, it has this cool release sync option, which will sync the release to the time signature of your song. I would say use that. Don't put too much stress on your ears. Use this, and then dial it in as you think it sounds good. I like how it goes with the 1/8 for this particular song. I think that's nice. Now, so the last thing we're going to talk about is the send effects. So send effects, you set them once, and you send from each track to them, and they sort of help everything feel like it's all in one space. So on the MC-101, you have reverb and you have delay. And it's easy to send to reverb on any track. You just turn up the knob number 4 by default. And you can hear that. Reverb is that spaciness. Whereas delay, you hit shift sound, go to setting, and go to delay send. And you hear that echo. That's reverb and delay. And so by using reverb and delay, you can give everything its own space. And since it's a send effect, you're sending each one to the same reverb and delay. So you're sending each track instrument to the same space, so you can have everything sound like it all sort of belongs together, which is a super useful thing to do, especially during the mixing phase. So that's really the gist of it. I am going to just quickly go through. You can edit the reverb and delay settings by hitting Shift Edit up here, going over to reverb and delay. So reverb, you have a few different types. Within each type is different settings that you can do. So the Integra is the default. I think that's based on some old chip or old pedal, maybe? Unit? I'm not really sure. But, you know, listen to what sounds good. You got rooms, halls. Plate is an old reverb technique where they put a speaker on a metal plate and then, like, put other, like, transducers, pickups on the sides of the plate. And that, you know, made that reverb sound so you can get more metallic-y sounds from plates. So that's the character of the Integra. There's also just a hall reverbs, which have just pre-delay is how long between it gets the sound and the reverb sort of happens. So if you turn this way up, you don't hear it so much on the hall, but if you do it on the Integra hall pre-delay, you can. It's a little harder to hear with the delay, so I'm going to turn the delay send off for now. But there's a little bit of a space, sort of like if your wall is far away that you're echoing reverb off of. The pre-delay sort of emulates that type of sound, so I'm going to go back to Shift, Edit, Reverb. We're on pre-delay. Time is just how long it lasts. Here at high time, you get a long time. Density is how, like, dense the reverb is. I'm not sure exactly what parameter that's changing. Diffusion, low frequency damp. A lot of low frequency damping will have less low frequencies in the sound. Same high frequency damp, a lot of high frequency damping will have less high frequencies in the sound. Spread has to do with the stereo field, tone. You can sort of shift it from a deeper to a higher, sparklier reverb that way. That's normal reverb settings. I do want to mention there's a couple of nifty types. These are normal. I don't know a lot about this GS one. But I do like this SRV ones have, if you turn these all the way down, this selection, which I don't know what it is. I think these are emulations of hardware. You can get real nice, like, metallic textures from these, which is really neat. Can add some fun. And then this SRV NL is like a gated reverb. You can see that on the thing here. You cut it off. Instead of, like, fading out, it just, like, cuts off at some point. And you can change the gate time. Make it longer or shorter. This is common for, like, 80s music. Had a lot of this sort of thing on the synths and the drums. So that can be really useful if you're going for that sort of effect. But yeah, play around, see what sounds good to you. I'm going to put it back to the Integra for now. So I'm going to go, now we can look at the delays. In fact, I'm going to go to Sound Setting, Delay Send, Reverb Off. So delay, Shift, Edit, scroll to delay. You have a few different options, all sorts of crazy different delays. But there's also some choruses here, because chorus is just a very short delay. With some stereo effects going on. So if you these choruses are emulations of hardware again that can just you can use this if you want chorus and a different M effects. You can use the delay send as another chorus, which is pretty useful. So your typical settings for delay are sync. We'll have it sync with the tempo of your song, or just how many milliseconds you can use between the delays. Feedback is how much delay comes out, how much of the signal that comes out goes back into the beginning of the delay. So if you turn the feedback up really high, this will last for a very long time. Will very slowly decrease in volume. So I'm just going to turn the feedback back down, and it'll fade out. Like 20% is like a normal amount of delay, I think. High frequency damp, same way as the other. This is damp whatever frequencies you want. Only delay like the lower frequencies. can be useful for different things. You can send to the reverb from the delay, which I think is really a neat effect sometimes to help stuff blend in, where the first note that you hear won't have any reverb on it, but after it, you'll have reverb on the delay, which I think is cool to like blend stuff in. You can even see as it goes here, it really like blends out into it, which can be a pretty nice effect. Yeah, that's reverb and delay. I do want to mention one more thing. I know it's been a bit of a long video already, but one more thing is that on the drum tracks, reverb and delay, the sends are both on the pads and on the kit itself. So if you go into a pad, like this clap sound, and I hit shift and the pad, and I scroll to pad edit, and I scroll to delay send and turn it all the way up, you won't hear any delay. And I'm going to turn the reverb send all the way up. You don't hear any reverb. That's because the kit reverb and delay isn't on yet. So if I go to shift, sound, scroll all the way over to setting, go over to delay send, turn it up. Now we hear delay, which is great, and reverb. Now we hear that nice big reverb and delay. The reason that this is this way is that you can have the kits have only some sounds go to reverb and delay. So if you want your kick, for example, I'm going to hit shift and the kick pad, pad 9, pad edit, turn the reverb send off, and there's no delay send on it. No reverb and delay on the kick, plenty of reverb and delay on the other stuff. You can really control what your drums sound like. So this can be confusing. So that's why I wanted to mention it real quick. I'm going to do other stuff on the drum effects with stuff you can do with the MFX on just a drum track and the compressors on a drum track. Fantastic, useful, incredible sound shaping possibilities. But for now, I just wanted to mention that's how the drum tracks work. You have to turn the effects up on the pad and on the kit as a whole to get those sounds to come through. So that's about all I got for today's lesson. This has been lesson 4. Thanks so much for sticking around, for checking it out, for liking and subscribing and commenting. All those things are super helpful and appreciated. There's more beginner stuff coming. If you want to see the rest of my MC-101 videos, there's a playlist that I have on my channel. I'll hopefully link it up here somewhere or in the description. It's a playlist of all the MC-101 stuff, which, you know, if you want to check out more of it, there's a lot more of it out there. So thank you so much. There's more beginner stuff coming, more advanced stuff coming. So like and subscribe. I super appreciate it. Again, 555 subscribers. Fantastic stuff. Thanks, everybody. And I hope you have an excellent day. And I will see you in the next one.